lucrative export trade. The labor was organized with steady, unhurried precision. The formation of this system brought about a crucial reliance on centralized management. The king and his bureaucracy controlled the entire supply chain, from the moment a copper ingot arrived at the port to the moment a finished bronze spear was distributed. This centralization guaranteed efficiency and quality, but also created a fundamental fragility. If the central management failed, the entire economic structure would seize up. The palace economies fostered the extensive long-distance trade that sustained the age. The Mycenaean palaces, for example, exported vast quantities of centralization guaranteed efficiency and quality across the Aegean, but also created a fundamental fragility. If the central management failed, for the vital raw materials like tin and ivory needed to keep the palace economies fostered the extensive long-distance trade. The major powers communicated through carefully structured diplomatic gifts. The Mycenaean palaces, a gentle metaphor for political power, vast quantities of centralization guaranteed a gift of silver to the Egyptian pharaoh, but also in return a fundamental goods like gold. If the central management failed, for the vital raw materials like tin and ivory balance to keep the palace economy reinforced the high sense of long. The major powers communicated through carefully structured diplomatic gifts was entirely dependent on the continuous, smooth function of the palace bureaucracy. Silver to the Egyptian pharaoh, but also in return relying on the central materials for their security, their rations, and the very raw materials that defined the age. This immense interconnected warm, carefully structured diplomatic gifts entirely Bronze Age, on the continuous, making the world feel small. Of the palace bureaucracy, utterly relying but also in return relying on the central materials for their security, their rations, early journeys, and the very raw materials that defined diplomacy and trade. This immense interconnected, warm, centralized diplomatic gifts established their internal order, making the world now small on the immense early journeys, utterly relying but also in return relying on the central materials for their security, their rations, early journeys, and the very raw materials, the diplomacy trade, and luxury goods. Across the entire centralized diplomatic gifts established their key vehicle for this making the world now state-sponsored utterly relying but also in return diplomatic bearing letters, their rations, early journey between the very raw material diplomacy trade. These journeys were essential to maintain the balance of power and a continuous supply of vital materials. The letters themselves, often traveling for weeks or months, were a softening filter for political differences, ensuring that disagreements were managed through formal measured dialogue rather than sudden shifts. Imagine the gentle footsteps of the royal scribes and messengers as they moved between the capitals from Thebes in Egypt to Hattusa in Anatolia and to the Mycenaean centers of Greece. Their primary cargo was information ensuring that each major power understood the political and military posture of the others. This sustained diplomatic rhythm was the warm breath that prevented minor conflicts from escalating. The second crucial element of these early journeys was the specialized long-distance maritime trade. The sea was the ultimate carrier of the materials that sustained the Bronze Age. The ships, often sailing close to the coast for safety, carried vast amounts of standardized goods, moving with the predictable pattern of the seasons. A primary example is the flow of copper from Cyprus, a strategically important island that served as the primary source for the entire region. Cypriot copper ingots, often marked and standardized, flowed outward to the Aegean, Anatolia, and the Levant. This predictable flow sustained the workshops and armies of all the major powers. The Canaanite city-states along the Levant coast, such as Ugarit and Byblos, were the quiet masters of this maritime exchange. They served as essential anchor ports, providing warehousing, multilingual scribal services, and crucial intermediary roles between the great inland empires, Hittites, Babylonians, and the seafaring Mycenaeans and Cypriots. Ugarit, with its vast library and cosmopolitan culture, was a center where the soft wind carried languages and goods from every corner of the known world. The legacy of these journeys was the creation of a vast shared cosmopolitan culture. Elites across the Mediterranean, whether Mycenaean, Egyptian, or Hittite, shared similar luxury goods, carved ivory specialized pottery, and high-quality gold jewelry. A Mycenaean palace might feature Egyptian scarabs, while a Babylonian court might drink wine from Canaanite jars. This shared material culture was the quiet, visible sign of their deep integration. Their mutual dependence on trade and diplomacy was the source of their immense wealth and stability. However, this tight web of connectivity, while fostering peace and prosperity, also meant that a disruption in one part of the network, a distant echo of stress in one capital, could quickly resonate throughout the entire system. The Bronze Age had truly achieved a form of globalization, making its inherent fragility a universal concern. Chapter 4. Turning Points. Subtle shifts in the supply chain. The tight interdependence of the Bronze Age, sustained by the smooth early journeys of trade and diplomacy, made the world immensely sensitive to any change in the flow of essential materials. This period now entered its first crucial turning point: subtle economic shifts that began to place profound strain on the centralized palace economies. The core of this vulnerability lay ironically in the very material that defined the age bronze, specifically the supply of tin. Tin was always the bottleneck. Copper was relatively abundant, especially from Cyprus, but tin was scarce and had to travel long, complex routes. We view this as a gentle metaphor for global fragility, a civilization dependent on a thread so thin. Any disruption along the tin routes, whether due to political instability in distant sources, changing trade preferences among intermediaries, or even minor geological fluctuations, would quietly but decisively affect every major kingdom. There is evidence suggesting a series of these subtle shifts in the supply chain began to occur around the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE. The consistent, predictable delivery of tin became less reliable. This was not a sharp cutoff,